Yeah, we had a couple papers that came out looking at 10 years of data using LFDCS, and so I'm just going to walk through that process, how we came through it, and kind of the information you can gather from the output that we've gained. It started with North Atlantic right whales, so for those of you who aren't familiar with them, they're a critically endangered species. There's only 360 of them left, with 70 breeding females that are kind of our main focus of species that we do in our group because of their critically endangered status. They have a declining population, really low calving rates, poor health, and then they're constantly being hit by ships or entangled in fishing gear, and so they're really the highlight focus species that we work on. And in 2010, we saw a really big distribution shift. So there's a lot of research focused on them with visual surveys where they know where they are. We're able to individually identify each whale, so we really have an understanding of how the population moves and where they go. And in 2010, we saw that that distribution shifted, and we really needed to understand how is it shifting and why. And once we understood that, also then we could ask the question, well, are other species shifting too? And if so, are they shifting in the same way or differently? And so we turned to passive acoustics to answer this question and did kind of a big data call. This is back in 2014 when we did this. So passive acoustics, while it existed, it wasn't something yet that we didn't need to prove was worthwhile. And so this was really our time to say, okay, this is what passive acoustics can show. So we put a data call out, and anyone that had recordings in the Western North Atlantic since 2004 pulled together their acoustic data for this project. We were going to analyze the data all in the same way, look at it, run LFDCS through it, and find right whale upcalls to find where they're located. This is a map of all of the data together. So these were 19 different organizations, many people that contributed. From there, this is the map of where all the data locations came from. We split the coast into 10 different regions, 11 different regions, just to kind of be able to understand when and where we were picking up calls. We also then looked at the data at 2 different times, so before and after 2010, to be able to see how they shifted. And this is showing just the spread of the acoustic recordings that we had available. And so this is looking at, from left to right, the year broken up by season, and then from top to bottom are those regions reflected on the map. So 1 on top down to 11, which is the Caribbean. And where it's a darker box means we had a full season of recordings available for that year. So you can see it's kind of spattered, but when we look at the 2 different time periods put together, where we can combine them, overall we have pretty good coverage in each region across each time period. These are the types of different bottom mounted recorders that we had available for this study in particular. There was the Maru from Cornell University, the Hart from Scripps, the AMR from JASCO, and the Haru from Oregon State. So different recording types, different frequency ranges, different duty cycles, all in different regions along the Western North Atlantic. And so this is our summary slide of everything Mark just told you in the morning. What does LFDCS do? So we learned that it creates a condition spectrogram, which we see up top. It detects the sounds and pitch tracks them, which we see on the bottom. And then it classifies those pitch tracks based on our call library. And in this case, we have fin whale 20 Hz pulses and sei whale downsweeps, which we saw in detail earlier. These are the different call types we're interested in for our species that we looked at. So right whales produce an up call. It's a contact call. It's used by all sex and ages, so we're able to use that in all regions to tell when they're there. And that's in the upper left corner. Humpback whales produce song and social calls that's variable and patterned and sometimes not. It changes from year to year and between years. And so that's an example of one of the years of a piece of song. Sei whales produce down sweeps, and that's what we're targeting down in the lower left corner. Fin whales and their 20 Hz pulses. And then blue whale songs, these A, B calls, which are just below where fin whales produce pulses. One of the things we initially wanted to look at was, could we do this, what Mark was talking about earlier, could we automatically look at some output rather than have to go through every single detection? And so the idea was if we subsample data and we look to see if there were or were not true detections, we could get an understanding of how many detections were needed for us to say that they were present. So this figure is looking at, in the subsample data, the number of detections per hours that occurred. And when we looked through those subsample data, were there no true detections or were there true detections? And from that distribution of subsampled analysis, we can then draw a logistic regression curve to be able to look and see how many detections we need to be a certain percent confident that that species is detected. And so we did this for all the species. For fin whales, we needed about 29 detections per hour to be 90% confident that they were present. Sei whales, we needed 4 detections per hour. Blue whales were 12, humpbacks were 136, and for right whales it was 21. And so for all of these, that seems not so bad, but then when we actually looked across the different regions and how this played out, it wasn't always true, and so it wasn't the way we could do it. So for sei, blue, humpback, and right whales, we determined this was not what we could do, and we had to manually verify all detections. For fin whales, this was a little more reliable, and so we used this number to limit what we actually have to look at, and so we look at only hours that have 29 or more detections, and then we go through and manually verify. So we never eliminate that manual verification, but we were able to at least decrease the amount of data we look at for fin whales. And so for each species, we then have a protocol of how many detections we accept to given a certain set of guidelines to mark that day as present. For us, we use daily presence. It's a little bit more broad scale, but in terms of knowing when and where species are and looking at changes, that's really all we need for that large scale analysis. And for right whales, we need 3 true correct pitch tracks in a day to mark that day as present. And so here's showing 4 right whale upcalls, all pitch tracked, and that day would be marked as true for detecting. Just to give an idea of how much data we had, Mark mentioned this already. We had 325 recorders for the right whale analysis, and then we were able to decrease the number of recorders for our humpback, sei, fin, and blue whales because some were closer together, so we theoretically would have calls detected on more recorders. That amounted to 35,600 days for right whales, 35,000 for the other species. And of these, we had varying number of days with verified presence from the LFDCS detector. So 2,500 for right whales, 6,800 for humpbacks, 4,000 for sei whales, 11,000 for fin whales, 3,000 for blue whales. It was really, really awesome to see everything come together. And so this is showing a snapshot of what it looks like for the right whale acoustic occurrence throughout the data. And this is cycling through months. So this is a summary of the whole data set from 2004 to 2014. Each dot is a recorder that was out at some time for that month. And then the warmer colors are where we have more days of the month with occurrence, and just white dots are no days. And so we're able to start to see movements through here in the animation, and then to look at that a little more solidly. This is looking at all of those regions that were on that map, which basically from north to south is split up here. So 2 being off the Scotian shelf and 10 being down off the southeast of the US, so Florida, where right whales have their calving grounds. And then looking at a summarized year. So this is from 2004 to 2014, summarized by month, so January through December, to get overall idea of seasonal presence of right whales. And this is looking at the average number of days per week with detections. And the main thing that you start to pull out is their movements. So we can see that, like we originally knew, they do typically move northward in the summer months where they're going to their feeding grounds, and then back down in the winter months towards their calving grounds. But the big new information from this study that we pulled out was that right whales are actually present along the entire coastline in the winter months. So this is something that we didn't know because we knew where they were in their calving grounds, but then the question was, where else are they? And so we found out they're actually all over the coastline. Very important when we're looking at ship strike and entanglement encounters. So then we wanted to look at the differences between before and after the shift that we knew was occurring in 2010. So there's that same figure but split. So on the left is before 2010 and on the right is after 2010. And there's of course some data gaps because this wasn't this was a lot of data pulled together from different study ideas that we're able to make a picture, but of course we do still have gaps. So that's where those are. And the big thing we saw when we looked at the 2 time periods was that right whale occurrence decreased in the Scotian Shelf and Gulf of Maine Bay of Fundy area and increased in the Mid-Atlantic area. And so that's how we knew how some things were shifting. So we got a lot of information from all of the data. The biggest thing that was really cool to see was that despite all of these projects having different goals originally, we were able to pull them together, run the same analysis on them, and get really extensive information. So we then took that and did it for the other species. So same data set, using the same output we already had from the detector run, we were able to then look at these other call types. For balloon fin whales, we do run LFDCS again in a lower sample rate with a different call library, and we can talk about that when we look at the programs. But you would get humpbacks, say, and fin whales from that original run that we did as well. And so this is just showing, in general, the seasonality across all of the data for each species. The big things we really saw were, like right whales with other species, they occur along the entire coastline for the most part in winter. So winter really shows a spread of species occurrence. There's very little occurrence of species except for humpback whales in the Caribbean region, which is something we already knew, but always nice to confirm in our data. Humpback whales and fin whales are pretty present everywhere all the time. Sei whales, you see a similar seasonal trend as right whales, where they're moving north. You're getting detections more northward in the summer months, and then see them coming back down into southern regions towards the winter. Blue and fin whales both have a decrease in acoustic occurrence in summer months, and this could be due to a change in acoustic occurrence too. So we're targeting very specific call types when we're looking at them: fin whale and blue whale song, which they do shift in the summer. But fin whales, we do still get them, so they are still occurring, just in smaller quantities. And then for humpbacks, sei, and fin whales, they occur pretty much year-round in that southern New England area, which is really important as we talk about wind farm development picking up, which is that region 6. And so that's something that we are continuing to look at now. So, like Mark mentioned, it's really important to evaluate your detector, not just evaluate it, but also what your analysis evaluation. So we looked at our missed detection rate based on a daily presence scale, because that's what we were doing our analysis on. And in this case, we missed blue whales 10% of days, fin whales 10% of days, humpbacks only 5% of days, and sei whales 14% of days. And we did a subsample of data and looked through the raw data to compare to see when we didn't get any detections, if they were actually there. And so those are the numbers that resulted from that. And for right whales, we missed a detection rate of 31%. And the thing to note about this, though, is this is using the Mahalanobis distance parameters we chose, the number, which for all species except blue whales was a maximum Mahalanobis distance of 3. For blue whales, we did a Mahalanobis distance of 5, and that was because we didn't get a lot of false detections, so it was easy to go through them. So we could increase the Mahalanobis distance and still get more detections without too many detections to go through. And then right whales, so right whales, I mentioned, we use 3 true detections for a day of presence. For other species, we have other protocols as well, and we can walk through that if anyone's interested. But that missed detection rate was because of our high protocol, conservative protocol of 3 detections. So if we chose only 1 true detection for that day, our missed detection rate would have gone a lot lower. I think it would have dropped to 28%. Yes?
Where do you find the ground truth for the confusion metric?
So going into the raw data itself and looking at days where we said no for presence, and looking to see if there were true calls present in the data.
Nothing out from the acoustic recordings.
Nothing out?
Like no tagged waves or
No, just from the acoustic recordings. Yeah, because remember, these were all, by the time we had looked at them, they were about 10 years old of acoustic recordings, so we didn't have anything to go with them. It was just the acoustic data. Yeah. And so this is just another way you can look at things and show how much information you can get from the output. This is looking at all the species, just presence from January through December across that 10-year data set, and broken out by color. So it's hard to pull patterns out of this, but it's one way that you can just look at everything and compare. And we've often now done this for just specific regions. So if you really want to look at the Mid-Atlantic, for example, yeah, just to show it all on one panel. So moving forward, so since then, we've collected data on, that project helped us see where we had data gaps and helped focus on where we should collect data, and then also direct to where we should continue in the future. And so we've done a lot of different recordings. At the moment, we have 50 sites out spanning the Western Atlantic. This is a map of some of the locations of our data, so every black dot is a recorder currently in the water. We now use soundtracks. They're made by Ocean Instruments out of New Zealand. And yeah, so we're continuously recording now in all of these areas and expanding our data set, and have a lot more data to look at since these papers came out. From that, we have streamlined protocols for all of the stages, so from data going in to the daily presence output. We've created robust training protocols for incoming analysts and colleagues that Julianne gives when needed. And if anyone's interested in that, that's something we have available, both the training as well as the products to use. Next steps is that we're working on those papers and those results for the next decade. So we're 10 years now out from when that data ended, which is kind of crazy. But using those same methods and being able to look at now versus then, have things changed, or are things changing within this decade as well? Being able to tease that out pretty quickly from this output. And then just wanted to mention one thing that we also have that we're working on is a cloud database for all of our metadata, detection data, and the results. And then we put these into a map that's online. It's a web app, the Passive Acoustic Cetacean map. And that goes in not only just from our analyses, but anyone that has output. So if you have output for species that you want to contribute to, it's a way to look at every acoustic available data point together. It's been really powerful and cool to see, so that you don't have to wait for a paper to come out 10 years later. It'll have everything there that you can start to look at. Okay, I think that's it for now.